Marcus Holloway had built walls around himself as sturdy as the ones that surrounded his 1,000-acre ranch in rural Montana. At 52, he was a man who preferred the company of cattle and horses to people. The death of his wife Sarah 3 years earlier had left him bitter and withdrawn, speaking only to his ranch hands when absolutely necessary. The October storm hit without warning, turning the afternoon sky black as coal. Marcus stood at his kitchen window, watching the rain slash against the glass in angry sheets. He'd lived on this land for 25 years, and he'd never seen a downpour this fierce. The wind howled like a wounded animal, bending the old oak trees until their branches scraped the ground. When the power went out, plunging the house into darkness, Marcus wasn't surprised. What concerned him more was the fence line that separated his property from the state road. That fence had been Sarah's pride. She'd insisted on the decorative iron posts and white wooden rails that made their ranch look welcoming. Now it was probably scattered across 3 counties. Marcus pulled on his rain slicker and stepped onto the covered porch. The storm was even more violent than it appeared from inside. Rain pelted his face like tiny bullets, and the wind nearly knocked him sideways. He squinted through the downpour, trying to assess the damage to his property. That's when he saw her. A figure in a bright yellow raincoat was hunched over something near his fence line, about 50 yards from the house. At first, Marcus thought it might be one of his ranch hands, but Jake and Tommy had both gone home before the storm hit. The person seemed smaller, moving with quick, efficient motions despite the terrible weather. Marcus grabbed a flashlight from the porch and made his way across the muddy yard, his boots sinking into the saturated earth with each step. As he got closer, he could see that a section of his fence had indeed been damaged, not destroyed, but several posts were leaning at dangerous angles, and the wire fencing had come loose. The person in yellow was working to secure the loose wire, using what looked like makeshift tools. When Marcus was about 20 feet away, the figure looked up, and he saw the face of a young woman, maybe in her late 20s. Her dark hair was plastered to her head, and her face was streaked with mud, but her eyes were alert and determined. "What are you doing on my property?" Marcus shouted over the storm, raising his flashlight so she could see him. The woman didn't run or look frightened. Instead, she held up a pair of wire cutters and pointed to the fence. "Your fence was about to fall into the road," she called back. "Could have caused an accident if someone hit it in this weather." Marcus moved closer, studying her work. She'd done a decent job securing the loose wire, certainly better than he could have managed in this storm. The posts were still crooked, but they weren't going anywhere tonight. "You know anything about fence repair?" he asked, having to shout to be heard. "Learned from my grandfather," she replied, wiping rain from her eyes. "Spent summers on his farm in Nebraska." "What's your name?" "Elena Martinez." Marcus looked past her to the road, where he could barely make out the shape of an old pickup truck parked on the shoulder. "That your truck?" Elena nodded, following his gaze. "Engine died right when the storm hit. Was trying to make it to town, but she gave out right here." "Where you headed?" There was a pause before Elena answered. "Looking for work. Heard there might be something in Billings." Marcus studied her face in the glow of his flashlight. There was something about the way she said it that made him think there was more to the story. "You got someplace to stay tonight?" Another pause, longer this time. Elena looked down at the tools in her hands. "I'll figure something out. In this storm, I've managed worse." Marcus felt something stir in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. Concern for another person. This young woman was clearly in trouble. Stranded in the middle of nowhere with no shelter and a broken-down truck. She'd been out in this terrible weather trying to prevent an accident, working on his fence when she could have just kept walking. "Come up to the house," he called out. "At least until the storm passes." Elena shook her head. "I don't want to be any trouble." "You already saved me from having to fix this fence in the morning. Besides, you'll catch pneumonia out here." Lightning split the sky, followed immediately by a crack of thunder so loud it seemed to shake the ground. Elena flinched, and Marcus saw something in her expression, not just cold and wet, but genuine fear. "Look," Marcus said, softening his voice as much as possible while still being heard over the storm. "My name's Marcus Holloway. This is my ranch. I'm offering you a warm place to wait out the weather. Nothing more, nothing less." Elena hesitated, looking between Marcus and her truck. Another flash of lightning made the decision for her. "Okay, thank you." They made their way to the house, Elena carrying her small toolkit, and Marcus lighting the way. The porch felt like a sanctuary after the violence of the storm. Elena stood dripping on his doormat, shivering despite her rain gear. "Let me get you a towel," Marcus said, opening the front door. "And maybe some coffee." Elena stepped inside cautiously, taking in the rustic furniture and family photos that still covered the walls. "This is a beautiful home," she said quietly. Marcus disappeared into the kitchen, returning with a thick towel and a steaming mug of coffee. "Sugar's on the counter if you need it," he said. "Bathroom's down the hall if you want to clean up." "Thank you," Elena said, accepting the towel gratefully. "I really appreciate this. I know you don't know me from anyone." "Anyone who stops to fix a stranger's fence in a storm like this can't be all bad," Marcus replied. As Elena dried her hair with the towel, Marcus found himself really looking at her for the first time. She was younger than he'd initially thought, maybe 25 or 26. Despite being soaked and muddy, there was a dignity about her, a quiet strength that reminded him of Sarah in some ways. "How long you been on the road?" he asked, settling into his favorite chair while Elena remained standing by the door. "Few weeks," Elena said carefully. "Had some family issues back in Colorado. Thought it was time for a fresh start." Marcus nodded, recognizing the tone of someone who didn't want to share too much too soon. "Montana's a good place for fresh starts. Hard country, but honest." "That's what I heard." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, listening to the storm rage outside. Marcus studied Elena as she sipped her coffee, noting the way she held herself, alert, ready to leave at a moment's notice. He'd seen that posture before, in animals that had been hurt. "Your truck," Marcus said finally. "What's wrong with it?" "Engine just stopped, made a terrible noise and then nothing. I don't know much about mechanics, but I'm guessing it's not good. I've got a friend in town who's honest with car repairs. Could have him take a look tomorrow if you want." Elena's face showed surprise and something else. Hope, maybe. "I don't have much money for repairs." "Let's see what's wrong first. Might be something simple." Outside, the wind was beginning to die down slightly, though the rain continued to pound against the windows. Marcus stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the darkness. "Looks like this might go on for a while," he said. "You're welcome to stay the night. Got a spare room upstairs." Elena set down her coffee cup and shook her head. "I can't impose like that. You've already done too much. Where else you going to go? Your truck's not running and there's not another house for 5 miles in any direction." "I could sleep in the truck? In this weather? That's just foolish." Elena looked torn, clearly uncomfortable with accepting more help, but also recognizing the reality of her situation. "I promise I'm not some kind of criminal or anything. I know you have no reason to trust me." Marcus turned from the window and really looked at her again. In the soft lamplight, he could see that beneath the mud and exhaustion, Elena was pretty in an understated way, but more than that, there was an honesty in her eyes that he found himself wanting to trust. "You know what convinced me you're not a criminal?" Marcus said. "A criminal wouldn't have stopped to fix my fence. They'd have kept walking and let someone else deal with the problem." Elena smiled for the first time since he'd found her, and Marcus was surprised by how it changed her whole face. "My grandfather used to say that how you treat other people's property when they're not watching tells you everything about a person's character." Smart man. Your grandfather? He was. Raised me after my parents died when I was 12. Marcus felt a familiar pang of recognition. Loss was something he understood all too well. I'm sorry for your loss. It was a long time ago, but thank you. The conversation lapsed again, but it was a comfortable quiet this time. Marcus found himself wanting to know more about this young woman who had appeared on his property like some kind of guardian angel, fixing his fence and asking for nothing in return. The spare room's got clean sheets, he said finally, and there's extra blankets in the closet if you get cold. Bathroom's got towels and soap. Elena looked like she was going to protest again, but another boom of thunder outside made her reconsider. Okay, but I want to help out tomorrow. Pay you back somehow for the kindness. We'll figure something out. Marcus showed Elena upstairs to the spare room, which he hadn't entered since Sarah's sister visited the previous Christmas. It felt strange having another person in his house again, but not unpleasant, strange, just different. There's aspirin in the medicine cabinet if you need it, he said from the doorway, and help yourself to anything in the kitchen if you get hungry. Thank you, Marcus. Really, this means more than you know. After Elena closed the door, Marcus stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to her move around the room. For the first time in 3 years, his house didn't feel quite so empty. He wasn't sure how he felt about that, but as he headed to his own room, he realized he was curious to see what tomorrow would bring. Marcus woke before dawn, as he had every morning for the past 25 years. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a crisp, clean silence that felt almost sacred after the chaos of the night before. Sunlight streamed through his bedroom window, revealing a world washed clean and sparkling with leftover raindrops. He dressed quickly and headed downstairs, surprised to find the smell of coffee already filling the kitchen. Elena stood at the stove, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, wearing the same clothes from the night before, but somehow looking fresh and alert. I hope you don't mind, she said, turning when she heard his footsteps. I couldn't sleep much, so I thought I'd make breakfast. Found eggs and bacon in your refrigerator. Marcus paused in the doorway, taking in the sight of someone else in his kitchen. For 3 years, this space had been his alone, silent, except for the sounds he made. Now, Elena moved around it with easy confidence, as if she belonged there. You didn't have to do that, he said, though he had to admit the bacon smelled incredible. It's the least I can do. Besides, I like cooking. It's been a while since I had a real kitchen to work in. Marcus poured himself coffee and settled at the kitchen table, watching Elena work. She moved efficiently, scrambling eggs in one pan while keeping an eye on the bacon in another. There was something soothing about watching someone else take care of these simple domestic tasks. How long were you on the road before last night? He asked. Elena flipped the bacon carefully before answering. About 3 weeks. Been staying in my truck mostly, or cheap motels when I could afford them. That's no way to live. No, Elena agreed quietly, but sometimes you don't have much choice. Marcus wanted to ask more, but something in her tone warned him not to push. Instead, he said, after breakfast, I'll call my friend Bobby about your truck. He runs the only honest garage within 50 miles. I told you I don't have much money for repairs. Let's see what's wrong first. Might be something simple, like a loose connection or a bad fuse. Elena served the eggs and bacon on 2 plates, sitting down across from Marcus at the table. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both looking out the kitchen window at the transformed landscape. The storm had left everything clean and bright, and Marcus's land stretched out green and endless under the morning sun. This is beautiful country, Elena said eventually. How long have you lived here? 25 years. Bought it right after I married my wife, Sarah. Elena nodded, not asking the obvious question about where Sarah was now. Marcus appreciated that. Too many people felt compelled to pry into other people's grief. "What kind of ranch is it?" Elena asked instead. "Cattle mostly. Got about 300 head of Black Angus. Some horses too, though most of those are just for riding. Must be a lot of work." "It is. Got 2 full-time hands, Jake and Tommy, but there's always something that needs doing." After breakfast, Marcus called Bobby Hernandez at his garage in town. Bobby agreed to come out and look at Elena's truck, and Marcus was grateful when his friend didn't ask too many questions about who Elena was or why she was stranded on his property. While they waited for Bobby, Elena insisted on helping with the morning chores. Marcus tried to protest, but she was already pulling on her boots and heading for the door. "I'm not going to sit around doing nothing while you work," she said firmly. "Besides, I like being useful." Marcus led her to the barn, where they fed the horses and checked on a pregnant mare named Duchess, who was due to foal any day. Elena seemed completely comfortable around the animals, speaking to them in soft, soothing tones. "You know horses?" Marcus observed, watching Elena examine Duchess with gentle, knowledgeable hands. "My grandfather raised quarter horses along with crops. I practically grew up in his barn." "What happened to his place?" Elena's hands stilled for a moment. "Had to sell it after he died. I was only 19 and didn't know anything about running a farm. The bank, well, they weren't very patient with a kid who was trying to figure things out." Marcus heard the pain in her voice and understood. He'd seen too many family farms get swallowed up by banks and corporations over the years. "I'm sorry. That must have been hard." "It was. That farm was all I had left of my family. But that's life, right? Things change. People move on." They continued working together, moving to the cattle barn where Marcus showed Elena how to check the automatic water systems and feed dispensers. She picked up everything quickly, asking smart questions and following his instructions precisely. "You're a fast learner," Marcus said as they headed back toward the house. "I've had to be. When you don't have much, you learn to make yourself useful wherever you can." Bobby Hernandez arrived around 11, driving his tow truck with its collection of mechanical tools and diagnostic equipment. He was a small, wiry man in his 60s, with grease permanently embedded under his fingernails and a reputation for honesty that stretched across 3 counties. "Morning, Marcus," Bobby said, climbing out of his truck. "Where's this vehicle that's giving you trouble?" Marcus introduced Elena and led Bobby to her pickup truck, which looked even more battered in the clear morning light. The truck was at least 15 years old, with rust eating at the wheel wells and a crack across the windshield that spoke of hard miles and harder living. Bobby popped the hood and spent several minutes poking around the engine, occasionally asking Elena to try starting it. The engine would turn over but wouldn't catch, making a grinding noise that even Marcus recognized as serious trouble. "Well," Bobby said finally, wiping his hands on a rag, "I've got good news and bad news. The good news is it's not your transmission. The bad news is your timing belt snapped, and when it did, it damaged some valves." Elena's face fell. "How much to fix it?" Bobby scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Parts and labor. Probably looking at $800, maybe $1,000. And that's if we don't run into any other problems once I tear it down." Elena closed her eyes for a moment, and Marcus saw her shoulders sag slightly. "I don't have that kind of money." "I could maybe work out a payment plan," Bobby offered kindly. "How would I make payments without a job?" Marcus found himself speaking before he'd really thought it through. "Elena's been helping me with some work around here. Maybe we could work something out." Elena turned to stare at him, surprise written clearly across her face. "Marcus, I can't let you—" "Hold on," Marcus said, raising a hand. "Just let me think for a minute." The truth was, Marcus did need help around the ranch. Jake and Tommy were good workers, but they were both getting older, and there was always more work than 3 people could handle properly. And there was something about Elena, the way she'd worked that morning. her quiet competence and willingness to learn, that made him think she might be exactly what his operation needed. "Bobby," Marcus said, "how long would the repairs take?" "If I order the parts today, maybe a week and a half at the outside." Marcus nodded, his mind racing. "Elena, you need a place to stay and work to pay for your truck repairs. I need help with fall roundup and getting ready for winter. Maybe we can help each other out." Elena stared at him for a long moment. "You're offering me a job." "Temporary position. Room and board plus wages. Should be enough to cover your truck repairs in a couple weeks." "Marcus, you don't know anything about me. For all you know, I could be completely useless around a ranch." "You weren't useless this morning. And anyone who stops to fix a stranger's fence in a thunderstorm isn't completely useless in my book." Bobby looked between them with interest. "Sounds like a fair deal to me. I'll have your truck towed to my shop and get started on it." Elena was quiet for several minutes, clearly wrestling with the decision. Finally, she looked up at Marcus. "What kind of work would I be doing?" "Ranch work. Helping with the cattle, maintaining equipment, fixing fence. Same stuff you did this morning, just more of it." "And you'd really let me stay in your house? Got that spare room sitting empty anyway." Elena took a deep breath. "Okay, but I want to do this right. Pay me fair wages and I'll work hard every day until I've earned enough to fix my truck and move on." Marcus extended his hand. "Deal." As Elena shook his hand, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of anticipation about the future. For 3 years, every day had been exactly like the one before it. Now, suddenly, things felt different. Unpredictable, maybe even hopeful. "I'll need to get some work clothes," Elena said practically. "And boots that aren't falling apart. There's a farm supply store in town. We can drive in this afternoon and get you outfitted." Bobby finished loading Elena's truck onto his tow truck and promised to call as soon as he had a better idea of the repair timeline. As he drove away, Marcus and Elena stood in the yard, looking at each other with the slightly awkward awareness that they were now, temporarily at least, partners. "So," Elena said finally, "what do we do first, boss?" Marcus grinned, surprising himself. "First, we go to town and get you some proper work gear. Then tomorrow morning, you start learning how to be a real ranch hand." "I won't let you down," Elena said seriously. Looking at her standing in his yard, with her determined expression and her chin raised slightly in challenge, Marcus found himself believing her. More than that, he found himself looking forward to finding out what kind of person Elena Martinez really was beneath the surface. 2 weeks later, Marcus stood at his kitchen window with his morning coffee, watching Elena work with Duchess in the corral. The mare had finally given birth 3 days earlier, and Elena had been the one to stay up all night with her when complications arose. She'd delivered the foal with the confidence of someone who'd done it before, and both mother and baby were thriving. Marcus had never seen anyone take to ranch life so naturally. Elena was up before dawn every morning, working alongside Jake and Tommy as if she'd been part of the crew for years. She could mend fence as well as either of the older men, had a gentle touch with the horses, and seemed to understand cattle in a way that couldn't be taught. More than that, she'd brought something to the ranch that Marcus hadn't realized was missing. The men smiled more now, sharing jokes over morning coffee and working with an energy that had been absent for months. Even the animals seemed calmer around Elena, responding to her voice and touch in ways that impressed everyone. But it was the effect she'd had on Marcus himself that surprised him most. For the first time since Sarah's death, he looked forward to each new day. Elena had a way of asking questions that made him see his own land with fresh eyes, and her enthusiasm for learning reminded him why he'd fallen in love with ranching in the first place. The sound of the phone ringing pulled him from his thoughts. It was Bobby Hernandez with news about Elena's truck. "Got her running like new," Bobby reported cheerfully. Turned out better than I expected. Only needed about 600 in parts and labor. Marcus did quick math in his head. Elena had been working for 2 weeks at fair wages, and with room and board factored in, she'd earned enough to cover the repairs with a little left over. But the thought of her leaving filled him with an unexpected sadness. "I'll let Elena know," Marcus said. "Thanks, Bobby." He found Elena in the barn, grooming one of the horses with careful, methodical strokes. She looked up when he entered, her face bright with the morning sunlight streaming through the windows. "Bobby called," Marcus said without preamble. "Your truck's ready." Elena's hand stilled on the horse's flank. "Already?" "He said it only cost 600. You've earned enough to cover it." For a moment, Elena just stood there, looking down at the grooming brush in her hand. When she looked up again, Marcus saw something like regret in her eyes. "I guess I'll need to go pick it up then," she said quietly. "I can drive you to town this afternoon." "That would be good. Thank you." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, both clearly thinking about what this meant. Elena would get her truck, pay for the repairs, and then... What? Move on to Billings like she'd originally planned? "Elena," Marcus said carefully, "you don't have to leave right away if you don't want to. I mean, if you're still looking for work, I could use the help permanently." Elena's eyes widened slightly. "You're offering me a permanent job? You're good at this work, better than good, and Jake's been talking about retiring for years. I'm going to need someone to replace him eventually." Elena turned back to the horse, resuming her grooming with perhaps more intensity than necessary. "That's generous, Marcus. Really generous. But I can't stay." "Why not?" Elena was quiet for a long time, working the brush through the horse's coat in long, steady strokes. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I'm not who you think I am." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What do you mean?" Elena set down the brush and turned to face him fully. "I told you I was from Colorado, and that was true, but I didn't tell you why I left." Marcus waited, giving her time to find the words. "I was married," Elena said finally, "to a man named David. He seemed wonderful at first, charming, successful, attentive. But after we got married, things changed. He became controlling, then possessive, then violent." Marcus felt anger rise in his chest, but he kept his expression neutral, sensing that Elena needed to tell this story in her own way. "It got worse over time," Elena continued. "He isolated me from my friends, controlled our money, monitored everything I did. When I tried to leave the first time, he found me within hours. Said he'd kill me if I ever tried to run again." "How did you get away?" "He was traveling for work, supposed to be gone for a week. I took what little cash I'd managed to hide, threw some clothes in my truck, and started driving. I've been moving ever since, trying to get far enough away that he won't find me." Marcus absorbed this information, understanding now why Elena had seemed so alert, so ready to run. "Does he know where you are?" "I don't think so. I've been careful not to use credit cards or stay in one place too long. But he has money and connections. If I settle down somewhere permanent, he might find you." Elena nodded. "I can't put you at risk, Marcus. You've been kinder to me than I had any right to expect, but I won't bring my problems to your door." Marcus was quiet for several minutes, thinking. Finally, he said, "Did you file a police report? Get a restraining order?" Elena laughed bitterly. "David's a lawyer. He knows how to work the system. The one time I called the police, he convinced them I was having a mental breakdown. Said I'd been acting erratically, making up stories. By the time they left, I was the one who looked crazy." "That's not right." "No, it's not. But it's reality." Marcus walked to the barn window, looking out at his land, his cattle, the life he'd built with Sarah and was now trying to maintain alone. He thought about Elena's careful competence, her gentle way with the animals, the way she'd brought laughter back to his ranch. He thought about Sarah, who had always stood up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. "What if you didn't have to run anymore?" he said finally. "What do you mean?" Marcus turned back to face her. "I mean, what if you had people who would stand with you? A place where you belonged, where someone couldn't just make you disappear?" Elena stared at him. "Marcus, you don't understand. David isn't just controlling, he's dangerous. If he found out where I was..." "Then we'd deal with it. Together." "We?" "Elena, in 2 weeks you've become part of this place. Jake and Tommy would fight anyone who tried to hurt you. So would I." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying that sometimes running isn't the answer. Sometimes you have to stop and make a stand." "But what if he comes here? What if he hurts someone because of me?" Marcus thought about this carefully before answering. "My Sarah used to say that evil only wins when good people are too afraid to fight back. She'd have liked you, Elena. She'd have said you belonged here." Elena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I don't know how to stop being afraid." "You don't have to stop being afraid. You just have to stop letting fear make your decisions." They stood in the barn, surrounded by the comfortable sounds of horses and the smell of hay and leather, while Elena wrestled with the possibility of a different kind of life. Finally, she looked up at Marcus with something like hope in her eyes. "You really want me to stay? I really want you to stay. Not just because I need the help, but because this place is better with you in it." Elena took a deep breath. "Okay, but if David ever shows up, then we'll handle it. All of us, together." That afternoon, they drove to town to pick up Elena's truck, but instead of using it to leave, she drove it back to the ranch and parked it next to Marcus's in the barn. It felt like a statement, a commitment to staying and fighting for the life she wanted instead of running from the one she feared. Over the following months, Elena settled into ranch life as if she'd always been there. She moved into the foreman's house when Jake retired, taking over many of his responsibilities with ease. She proved to be not just a good worker, but a natural leader who earned the respect of the other hands through competence and fairness. Marcus found himself changing too. The loneliness that had consumed him since Sarah's death began to ease, replaced by a sense of purpose and partnership. Elena wasn't Sarah. She was her own person, with her own strengths and perspectives. But like Sarah, she made him want to be better than he was. When David Martinez finally tracked down his missing wife 8 months later, he found not a frightened, isolated woman, but someone who had built a new life surrounded by people who cared about her. The man who showed up at the ranch was smooth and confident, expecting to intimidate Elena back into submission. Instead, he found Marcus and 3 ranch hands waiting for him, along with Sheriff Morrison, whom Elena had finally worked up the courage to contact. Faced with multiple witnesses and Elena's clear testimony about his past abuse, David's lawyer facade cracked quickly. He left Montana that same day and never returned. Elena Martinez had come to the Holloway Ranch as a stranger fixing fence in a storm. She stayed as family, helping to heal a broken man and a lonely place. Sometimes the best things in life come when you stop running long enough to let them catch up with you. A year later, when Marcus asked Elena to marry him in the same field where she'd first repaired his fence, she said yes without hesitation. They were married by the same minister who had buried Sarah, surrounded by friends and neighbors who had watched their love grow from respect and partnership into something deeper. Elena never forgot the night she'd arrived in the storm, frightened and alone. But she also never forgot the morning she'd chosen to stay, to fight for the life she wanted instead of fleeing from the one she feared. In the end, that choice made all the difference.